Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Relative Roads podcast. I'm your host, Mike Haley. This episode very special to me indeed. This is my brother-in-law, Darrell. Darrell is a black police officer here in Northern California, which I happen to find intriguing. In an outrage culture that we deal with in social media and possibly in places in the real world, I'm curious what the pressure is like for a black police officer. So we get into a lot of that sort of subject matter. But that's not the only thing we talk about. I'm getting to know Darryl as family and as a new member of my personal community, my inner circle, if you will. And we talk about our core beliefs, our religious standpoints, political standpoints. We talk about Trump, how he feels about that. One of the more interesting things is his version or his perspective on the use of the N-word. We talk about the Stephon Clark incident. And the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. We kind of touch on a lot of really cool topical stuff. And I think you or anybody else would benefit from this episode, not only to see from the perspective of a police officer, but just as a member of the community who's committed to being an example of leadership. And I'd like to thank Darryl for being who he is, and I'd like to thank God for him being in my family. That being said, enjoy the episode, because I damn sure did.
I'm just a wandering nomad out on the interstate. Eventually all these roads just end up looking the same. And now it's time for another episode of Relative Roads.
Religion traditionally has put a bad taste in a lot of mouths, right?
Yeah.
But evolution is a real thing.
Sure.
And we are now in a technological, peak as far as evolution is concerned. As we sift through all these options, all these ideas, idealisms, and things that are floating around for us to grab onto, consider yourself lucky, as I do, that you're aware of a lot of the things that are going on, and you get to choose what you subscribe to. I think before there was internet, before there was the ability to look at all your options as loosely as people can now, going to church was beneficial to a lot of people. And this is everybody on the spectrum, from self-reliant to completely disgustingly most needy people. And these are just people with a lesser intellect of sorts, but need things broken down in a way that they can understand. And things used to kind of work before in terms of having a church community to belong to, because then you had a set of rules that you kind of understood, and you knew that if you broke those rules, there were consequences. Mm-hmm. You get lost in translating all of that. But in essence, having a community or a religious faith to hold on to is important. And it doesn't have to be someone else's religion. It doesn't have to be someone else's version of a religion. But the essence of what religion can do is a healing factor. The fact that if a person can open up a Bible and read a story that translates to them in a way that shifts their paradigm or gives them some sort of a shift, so that they start making improvements in their own life, therefore starts improving their circle and then improving the community. And there's this like positive reaction in the ripple of their life, right? That's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. What gets bad is when they start, and I'll explain my experience with this, especially most recently, when they start feeling the need to shove that same information down someone else's throat. They may not be articulate enough. They may not be creative enough to give what they're trying to give. Mm-hmm. And the problem is we see that as a threat. Don't make me believe what you believe. That doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. All they're really trying to do, and mind you, boundaries are important for this, but all they're really trying to do is give you a gift of positive energy. That's in essence what a lot of religious people are trying to do, is give you what they're experiencing. And what they're experiencing is using the right math to build a life that they see fit for themselves. Mm-hmm. me personally, within the last, let's say, 3 years, I made some fairly pivotal decisions in my life. One was not reacting to specifically my son's mother the way I was. I was very reactive. It was like a bomb would drop in my reality and I would explode and I'd see bits and pieces of myself everywhere I'd have to pick up over time. That didn't work. So I made a decision. I'm not going to react. I'm going to try this other thing. I tried that other thing. Lo and behold, I've gained complete control of the situation I had no say in at some point. That translated into other facets of my life. My job, I wasn't able to perform the same job I was doing, but there were times when I would get fired or get let go from a position or a job, and I had this opportunity to, again, react to a situation. I chose not to. I chose to take the higher road, perform well with whatever's in front of me, and it worked out for the best. There was no vengeance, and yet it was in there emotionally. I had this sort of feeling to deal with, but ultimately I chose a higher path. And I think that's just what the fundamental message of the Bible is, or of religion is. Listen, there's this mathematical thing that you can do to better your situation. You don't have to take it at surface level. You don't have to take it as completely like the literal meaning of this isn't what's important.
Sure.
Like when people say, be like Jesus. To me, Jesus, the story of Jesus represents the prime example of what we are capable of. Humans are capable of being that compassionate, being that forgiving, being that loving, being an example of resilience, of loving your neighbors no matter what, right? We all want somebody like that. But right now, it's really hard to trust each other. So the way I look at it is be like Jesus is be your own potential. Knowing that you can be like that, knowing that you can, it's going to take some sacrifice, but knowing you can be that same way with your neighbors, your family, whoever you have in your circle of friends, you spread that energy. And then you're contributing to the community. That's what's important. It's not the whole, there's a guy in the sky, and if you do something wrong, he's going to put you in hell. Right. To me, heaven and hell are a part of this reality. Those words were created in this reality. That concept of if you don't do the right thing, you're going to experience hell. Well, that happens right here. You keep making the wrong decisions, you're going to live in that pain. And almost infinitely. You're waking up every day like, F word. I don't know how to get out of this. Sure. Well, maybe if you chose something different, you could go the other direction. And at some point, you could experience heaven or a heavenly experience in this reality.
Interesting. I never thought of it like that, but I can definitely subscribe to that because,
it makes it easier to deal 100%. With people.
Well, and if you think of the Bible as more just a bunch of fables that have lessons in them, then, as opposed to being this literally happened, where this literal thing happened. Moses split the Red Sea and came down with these commandments. And there's people that have studied the Bible that have kind of gone into deep dives as to more of a realistic
scientific
reason, and kind of explained
real floods, asteroids, things like that.
Exactly, that can explain some of these seeming miracles that were kind of described in the tales of the Bible. But thinking of it that way, the way you just described, is much more digestible
and applicable,
and
sure.
That too,
yeah.
As opposed to,
and let me tell you, it breeds a sort of peacefulness with other parts of your community that you would otherwise be adverse to, because it's like for me, like for the longest time, when people would start spewing God talk, so to speak, I would have this automatic shutdown inside. I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. I don't want your beliefs and your whatever you got going on. Great for you, but now I'm able to translate any version of what they see to work for me, and therefore it continues that positive vibe. And so it creates this new realm that I live in, where it's like I'm not afraid of anybody. Yeah, I can put boundaries up if I need to, and
what's fascinating too is that there's so many different religions, and they're all similar in some regard, and their basic teachings is like, hey, just kind of be kind to one another, and kind of just live the life you want to live, and treat others the way you want to be treated, and things of that nature. But then some of the when you start getting into the finer details of things, that's when they start to vary. But even the approach of some religious teachings that, like, for instance, like Christianity and Catholicism, you kind of go out and you try to recruit people to that religion, whereas Judaism isn't much like that. It's kind of like, well, you just kind of just, there's a lot of strict rules in Judaism, but one of those things is not to go out and recruit people. If you want to become a Jew, then you want to, practice Judaism, there's just a lot of rules that go along with that, and you just kind of follow these rules, and that's why it's hard to be an Orthodox Jew. Whereas Christianity, while there's a lot of rules to that too, one of the basic premises of Catholicism and Christianity is to go out and actively bring people to the religion, and that kind of, I think that leaves a real bad taste in people's mouth, because going back to what you were saying, it's like, now I'm kind of beating you over the head with, hey, you're fucking up. Your life is you're going to go to hell. This hell place. And it's going to be like eternal agony. And if you don't think of it in the way that you described, where it's like, well, yeah, you kind of living up, and, the things that you're doing are kind of affecting your world. And, obviously the more negative things you do, the more, difficult your life is going to be. But if you think of hell as this, place that you go to when you die, and your soul's going to be tortured and ripped apart in a million ways every single second, then that just leaves a bad taste in people's mouth, and it turns people away from religion, as a whole, and people don't want anything to do with it.
So what I think, what I take from that is, people aren't responsible for your ability to set boundaries. And when a community feels obliged to send recruits, so to speak, out into the world, there are people out there who need that. There are people who are lost in translation, can't find the life jacket or lifeboat or whatever out there in the waters, and they're drowning in their own situation. And somebody will come along who is a recruiter of sorts, gives them some sort of tether, then they pull them in, they reel them in, and then now that's their journey, and they have a right to that, and in fact, it could save their lives. And I think that it's your responsibility, being a mature adult, to set boundaries, and if people don't respect that, that's a different issue. That has nothing to do with the religion. I think that in that community, or that version of a community, it's important for them to go out and find people who are lost. I think that's in essence, that's important. We need, as a species, as a human, species, we need people out there in rescue boats for people who are lost. You know what I mean? Like, I think that creates a lot of value. So I don't want to diminish the idea that's not necessary. I think it is. No, for sure. To some degree.
Well, because even if you reach one person out of, say, 100 people, and, I guess that one life that you brought to wherever you were trying to take them is worth it. And I think that translates into almost every job. I mean, absolutely. Doctors do this every day. Hey, your cholesterol's high. You need to change your freaking diet. And, a lot of people don't listen. Some people do. And so you change it. Or even in my job, it's like, hey, you keep doing this, you're gonna keep seeing me, and you're gonna keep ending up in this situation. A lot of people don't listen. Some people do, and I guess you really don't ever really know sometimes how you affect people's lives, and it may not even be in that instance. It may be years down the road where it's like, holy crap, that person said something that just has resonated with me. Why can't I get that out of my head? Is there something to that? And then they start to explore it, and the next thing you know, they've changed their lives. And that may be something that we as it's funny because people, ask me, how I'm doing, what I'm doing, and I'll say I'm doing the Lord's work. And, not necessarily literally meaning.
You're being sort of facetious in a way.
Kind of, but it's kind of true, especially if you take your interpretation of, God and Jesus. And, we're out just trying to make a difference in the world in a positive way. And how people decide they want to interpret the things that I'm saying, if they want to say that I'm being preachy or whatever, or sometimes they may be like, you know what? Hey, that cop is right. I don't want to get arrested. This kind of sucked. And
they see the math. And I keep saying that term, and I'm sorry for beating it up, but that's what's behind the veil of what people present. And I just am, in a way, doing the same. I'm offering you a possibility of a newfound freedom in this shared reality. Because I, like yourself, for a long time, had such a opposition to just the language alone. Like, don't come at me with that stuff. I don't have the ability to interpret that safely. All that means to me is threat. All that means to me is I'm insignificant. And it had all these different negative connotations behind the meaning for me. But I, over time, was able to sort of just kind of make it my own thing. I just took responsibility for what I was feeling. And ultimately now the fundamental aspect of setting boundaries is all that's really a problem. Like in any culture, let's say homophobes. A lot of people think homosexuality, when they see it, is what grosses them out. But fundamentally, it's just not what they're attracted to. It's not what turns them on. So they have this reaction, which you're entitled to that reaction. But once you start poking at them for what they believe, that's a violation of freedom. Because it's like, dude, I don't want to see two ugly straight people kiss in front of me more than I want to see two gay guys kiss in front of me. It's not what I want to see.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
No, sure.
And you think about the exceptions you make in what you do like and what you'll be okay with, depending on the situation. So I think when you break belief systems down like that, it gives you like the whole discipline thing, and you're able to sort of keep track of what you're feeling and how you react to certain things. You then get to have a call in how this turns out. You know?
Yeah. For me, and too, for the religion stuff, growing up in the church, what really turned me off was the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
I would see a lot of people preaching these things and like, oh, and then, especially in black churches, they'll catch the Holy Spirit and they'll just be dancing in the aisles and kind of flailing all over the place. And, I'm not doubting that they've caught this Holy Spirit, or they're, whatever is causing that is real. However, it would be like the same person that would be out in the world kind of doing the opposite of what they claim that they're, affected by. It's just like, well, wait a minute. And I would see this all the time. And I would be like, well, wait a minute. And that was kind of growing up and noticing these things and processing these things. It kind of left a really bad taste in my mouth for church as a whole.
Right.
And in some ways that translated into, and it didn't take until I got older, as my interpretation of the Bible itself. And it's just like, well, there's these people that are teaching me this stuff and they're super, by and large, hypocritical. So I should just dismiss this whole thing.
Yeah.
Which,
put it in the box and shove it under the bed.
Isn't really logical from that standpoint, just because the people that are preaching this stuff themselves may have issues. That doesn't necessarily devalue the thing that they're teaching. And so the teachings of the Bible, I think, are extremely important, because there is a lot of parables in there that can apply to people's lives. And by and large, if we follow the basic precepts in the Bible, I think it makes for a much better society, quite frankly.
It's worked out in a lot of ways for different, communities, for sure. And I personally, to kind of break down my belief in, let's say, God, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it right now, but I think that we all belong to the same energy source. We are all, like when you die, your energy goes into, what your primary energy is. If you're a mostly positive person and your experience in life is to do well for you, yourself, and your community, that's where your energy goes, is back into this sort of hive mind kind of thing. I don't necessarily think there's a place called heaven and hell. I don't personally believe in that. I do believe that those are, ideas that are for us to understand how consequences work in life choices. I think that's really what it is. Because you always hear the term, it's a living hell kind of thing. Well, that's really as far as it goes. Because honestly, whatever happens after we die is none of our business. It doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. The fact that people will go back and forth about what happens is irrelevant. It's not a part of your... If you knew what it was, you'd be dead.
Sure. And I think people need to sometimes believe in a heaven and or a hell to keep them on track, right? If I believe that if I do these good things, and as a result of me doing these good things, I get accepted into this paradise, then I'm going to continue to do these good things.
Right. Yeah.
And if that's what you need to tell yourself, to do these good things, then whatever. That's perfectly fine. Or the converse of that is, I don't want to go to this thing by stint of doing these bad things. So if that's what prevents you from doing bad things, then please, by all means, do that. Believe that. Believe whatever you have to believe. At the end of the day, I think that people just need to believe whatever it is that they need to believe, whether it's heaven, hell, God, freaking Buddha, Allah, whatever. I don't really care.
Yeah.
If that's what makes you a good person, then please do that. And we could sort it all out. And I don't know if I necessarily believe that we, when we die, our spirits get, uploaded into some battery source or something like that. But that's fine. I don't for me, it's like, I don't know. And I'm not going to presume to know. Yeah. And whatever happens. Yeah. All I know is I'm just going to do the best that I can while I'm here. Yeah. And hopefully the end result of that pays off. Because one of the other things too, especially with Christianity, is, again, like, you have to believe these certain things, but what if you lived in a place where you were never exposed to that? Yeah. No one was there to ever teach you that. So are you this by stint of where you were born and where you lived and the environment that you're in, and you didn't have the ability to be exposed to the teachings of Jesus Christ and God our Savior and all of that stuff? Are you just now automatically condemned to hell, even though you may be a good people or person? Mm-hmm. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, that you had that one fool that went to that island where there's all these like indigenous people who are still like living back in like, the Stone Age or whatever, and they killed him. Yeah. And it's like, for me, it's like, that, who are you? And I understand, I'm not saying that his intentions weren't good, but they told him, don't do this. These people have a certain way of life, and if you go over there, they're not going to treat you the way you want to be treated. Why is it upon you? Like, that's extremely arrogant, in my opinion, that you feel the need to save these people. It's his own free will, I guess. Yeah. Hey, man. Well, we see how that paid off. I mean, it's tragic and it's unfortunate, but again, it's like that. Those group of people have never been exposed to that teaching, so are they just automatically condemned? Right. That doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't seem fair or just, or and I understand that God isn't fair or just or any of these things, and life is what it is. Like, why children get cancer, for example, like that seems kind of shitty. And why would a just God do that? But why, are these people automatically condemned? And those are the kind of things that I just can't wrap my head around. Sure. And it's hard to rationalize this with a fair and just God. So for me, looking at, let's say, the breakdown of God or the breakdown of the afterlife, that's all for philosophy's sake. There's no finite thing that anybody has to adopt into their own lifestyle or their own belief system. It's merely for sake of conversation. It's merely for connecting through conversation. That's all it is. Because the fact that it's irrelevant what happens means that it doesn't matter what you think, what I think. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. All that matters is if we want it to matter. If we want to have a conversation and align our beliefs together, then that's our choice. We can do that. That's the liberty of being human and having a language. The situation that you're speaking about, they had a different life language. They had a different reality. Mm-hmm. There's no condemning them because we don't live in that world. Exactly. We don't know. It's irrelevant. Yet again, what happens outside of this reality is none of our business. And when somebody goes poking around like that, well, you got what you came for. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, now you know. Yeah. So, well, like people told you, don't. Yeah. Don't go over there, man. Now you're a fucking stupid story we can talk about in a podcast. That's your fault. Yeah, 100%. And, thank you for being giving us the ability to talk about your stupidity. Because I'll never go there and try to find the same thing. No, absolutely not. Yeah, you can learn from other people's mistakes as well as your own. Oh, yeah, for sure, man. Yeah. So, anyway, you want to... It's been recording, so... Oh, that's fine with me. Yeah. Anyways, so funny. I'll get on this thing. Can you hear okay? Oh, yeah. Okay, you may need to move up close if you want. You already are projecting quite well, so you don't have to worry too much. I have a big mouth, so it helps. It's never been something that anybody has accused me of, is projecting. Yeah, when I would drink a lot, I'd always end up in trouble for being loud. Yeah. I don't do that anymore, but yeah. Yeah, my we tend to be loud people. So
yeah. So
I don't know why. I don't know what there are definitely stereotypes that are true. All stereotypes are in some ways based in reality. So
I think I know what you're saying.
yeah. You picking up what I'm putting down? Okay.
Okay. So, and this is more for a personal
Go ahead.
inquiry, my own curiosity. You are a highly intellectual, established member of the community, in my eyes. I'm still getting to know you, so maybe there's some locked away crazy that'll pop out at some point.
I mean,
Which is fine. Right now, you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see that happen too.
Let me put my phone on mute so that I don't be the asshole. Last time I did an interview, my phone went off. I was the fucking idiot.
Don't be that guy.
Yeah. Oh, you were using that for your faces. Let's do this. Okay. The use of the N-word seems to happen more with people who don't appreciate intellectual growth. That's just been my perspective. Does that term come up in your exchanges with your friends? Do you still use that as a term of endearment?
Yeah. So, the N-word for me is so. Yes, in a word. However, I believe in free speech. So I believe that there is no word that should be off limits.
Yeah.
So so here's the thing. Either the N-word is a good word to use or it's a bad word to use. And we don't we as black people, I find it so ridiculous when black people get triggered by another race, specifically white people, using the N-word, even if they're using it in a context that is not derogatory, like straight up saying you are an N-word. And it baffles me that if I'm talking to another black person and we could say it, colloquially and in jest and as a term of endearment, why can't other people say it as a term of endearment? We don't own a word.
Yeah.
It's free speech. Anybody can say anything. How we choose to react to it is completely up on us. And I didn't always used to think that. One time I was growing up and I lived in Maryland for a little bit of time. And, I was walking home one day and I was walking home it was me and a group of black people, and then there just happened to be a group of white people walking. We all went to the same school. We were just walking in groups, and we knew each other. It was just how we just happened to sort ourselves out as we were walking. Well, the group of white people decided to throw a full Coke bottle over a fence, and there was a trucker driving by. He's driving one of those big industrial trucks, and it hit the windshield and exploded. And he, of course, immediately slams on the brakes, looks over, and he just sees the black people, and he's like, "Hey, you effing N-words," and all of this stuff, and just starts just laying into, the racial profanity and all of that stuff. So, of course, 15 years old, I'm like, all of us look at each other, and we start sprinting around, trying to get around this fence. And it was a tall fence. We couldn't let less. It was like 10 feet, so, it would have taken longer to climb it than just to run around. By the time we were able to run around, he drove off. And I was furious. So I go home and I'm talking to my stepdad, and I'm just like, this happened today and this and that. And he's just like, okay, well, what does that word mean? And I was like, someone that's ignorant and, da 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 da. And I'm just going off, and he's just like, well, are you ignorant? And I was just like, well, no. And he's just like, well, then why are you allowing someone to call you something that you're not? And why are you allowing it to affect you? More, why are you allowing someone to say something this way and it's having this effect on you if you're not this thing? And I didn't have any answer for him. And ever since that day, that word lost all power over me. And I was just like, because I didn't have a response. Yeah. And so and I was 15 years old. And, and so from then on, I personally could care less if you use the word. Now, frankly, if black people are going to be so enraged when white people use the word, then it would seem to me that we shouldn't use the word either. Either it's a terrible word or it's not a terrible word.
Right.
And it's really weird because I don't know. There was a controversy the other day, or maybe I don't know, maybe a year ago now, where Kendrick Lamar was doing a concert, and he would pull a fan on stage to kind of, recite the lyrics to one of his songs with him. And he pulls some girl on stage, and, white girl. And she's just singing the song, and, in the verse that she was rapping, the N-word was in there. And so she says the N-word because probably when she was alone in her car, she probably recites the song, verbatim, as most people do when they sing songs and listen to lyrics and things of that nature. That's just what people do. So she on stage says the N-word, and everybody loses their mind, calling her racist and this. And I'm just like, how? It's in his song. That doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
Their lyrics are literally, all she's doing is just reciting lyrics. She's not necessarily saying it in a derogatory way. There's not even any context there. She's just simply reciting the song as she knows the song. So I think that Black people, and I understand the history behind the word, and we can, go into that too if you want. But
not necessary, because I'm with you on this thought process.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't get it. But
I think it is a place that I can go by inquiry, but I don't necessarily want to talk to everybody about it. Mm-hmm. I just feel comfortable with you.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel that the way you think about things is logical, rational, and I feel exactly the same about the word. Words in general are meant for expression. Mm-hmm. I think, like in comedy, everything's down to timing. Cuss words, same thing. Mm-hmm. Everything is down to timing. If it's in the right place at the right time, it's appropriate. But if you're using it as some sort of an intellectual weapon, then you better be prepared for consequences.
Sure.
I mean, because you add the hate factor or some sort of, negative emotion behind it. I don't want to say that any emotion's negative, but when you put some sort of aggression behind a word, there's going to be some backlash. Mm-hmm. And if you're stupid enough to think that's not going to happen, then you're just an idiot, and I'm sorry that your reality is pretty painful. Yeah, most likely.
Well, and it's funny too, that specific word, because my friends and I have this debate all the time, actually. Not so much recently, but we'll kind of explore, my Black friends, and I've had Black friends that have thought that under no circumstances should a white person be able to say this word, mm-hmm. And and they used to get really offended when a white person, even some of our closest friends who were white, they didn't like it when they would use this word, and this particular person has kind of evolved from it, so to speak. Is still not a huge fan, but it's like, for me, at the end of the day, it's a word, and words only have as much power as we assign them to it. And kind of to talk about the history from it for a standpoint is, at one point in time, this word was used as a derogatory term for Black people. If you were called the N-word, then you were all of these horrible things. You were ignorant, you were nothing, and all these things. So, or as time has gone on, we as Black people have kind of claimed this word for ourselves, and now we took that power away from those that were using it against us, and to turn it into a power word for us.
Sure.
And following that trend of words evolving, because words always evolve over time.
Yeah.
And the meanings of words evolve over time, and how they're used evolves over time. I don't see why now it can't continue to evolve, especially in the fact that it's now in so much of pop culture and so much of culture in general. I don't see why it can't now evolve into, it's just a term, mm-hmm. that everybody can use because it's in, there's a author by the name of Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he was talking about this one day, and he was asking, well, why do white people feel the need to even want to use this word? This is our word, and this and that. And I'm like, well, you have to understand, there's kids today that weren't born in the segregated South or during slavery, right, and during some of the most racial times in our country, where now this word is integrated into all of this pop culture, and they hear their favorite artists saying this word, and the ways that it's used, or they even see it in movies, or they see it in TV shows, and they hear them in interviews, and they're using this word as a term of endearment, or as a term that they're just using that really has no, you don't understand the history behind the word when they're using it.
You're removed from that.
Right. Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons why people do it, because art imitates life. People then go out and say the things that they hear their favorite artists saying, the things that they hear in all of these role models, if you will. There are these people that they look up to using this word. So that's the reason why. It has nothing to do with them being racist, and them, hell, they may not even understand the racial history behind it. Yeah. Should they understand the racial history behind it? I don't know. Maybe, yeah, it would make sense. But is it required that they understand the racial history behind it before using a word? I don't necessarily think so, but it would make sense that if you're going to start saying things, you should understand. Yeah. But I don't necessarily think that's a requirement to use words.
Yeah. I think the only reason why you would want to know the history is if you're surrounded by people who find it unacceptable.
Sure.
Then you need to understand why people take such offense to it. Because then you can kind of navigate through that world. And quite frankly, at some point, you do have to respect the airspace that people share with you, because, you know, in order to keep your community sort of at a peaceful level, you do have to regulate your forward thinking sometimes, because people aren't ready. And that's just the way of life. If you don't like that, you can choose to go live in a different community, or go live off the grid if so many ideals bother you. The thing about it is, we as a species like to juice the crap out of all the ideals that we come across until we find the gold. And this is just one of those things where this word has evolved into pop culture. And like you're describing, it's acceptable under this thought process. And I happen to subscribe to that as well, that definition of how to deal with it. And I think unless people hear that perspective, it's trendy to jump into a group and say, we don't accept this, because they ultimately just want to belong to something. That's the essence of what's going on, is they hear their favorite artists, they want to use the same terminology because they now belong to this special group of folks who enjoy this art or artistry. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously understanding the history and understanding your audience is, because while I think this is where we should be, we definitely aren't there.
Yeah.
And far be it from me if I have no problem if you say it around me, but I don't necessarily know if it's wrong or think it's wrong if this person that's standing by me that's black hears you and takes extreme offense to it. Like, I'll defend your right to say it, but you're ultimately responsible for the consequences that follow that.
Yeah, timing's everything. And I think that if a group of, let's say, all white kids are hanging out and they want to use that term, there should be nothing wrong with it. If the crowd they're around is okay with it, if the space they're in, gives them the opportunity to use it freely, great. You should use every single word to express how you feel and enjoy that freedom, that liberty, because not every country has that.
No, 100%. And that's what's one of the beautiful things about America. And this kind of goes into some of these other words and terminology like hate speech. Like, well, what the hell is hate speech? There's just free speech. There's no such thing as hate speech. Right. And you're you're seeing a lot of it. And what's really scary is the big tech companies that are starting to kind of venture into this avenue of kind of being the authoritarian of, hey, this is speech that we need to police, and you can't say these things. And if you say these things, then you're violating, and we're going to censor you. And it's just like, whoa. Who determines what is hateful and what is not? Because what may be hateful to me may not be hateful to you, and vice versa. And now we start to get into these people actively policing the things that people say. Just because you're offended by something someone says doesn't mean that it's hateful. You just could disagree, and it can hurt your feelings, and that's fine. That's how anytime we have a conversation where we're exchanging ideas, the risk of being offended is always there.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean the thing that I've said is hateful in nature, just because it offends your sensibilities.
Yeah. Well, I think vulnerability is a big part of growth. And in any opportunity to grow, you're going to have to expose yourself, and you're going to have to use the vocabulary that you have. And I mean, you learn the hard way sometimes that you can't say certain things. And quite frankly, that's a great way to filter out your crowd and say, well, this isn't for me. I'm going to go elsewhere. And that's totally your option. What I think is happening too is that there is a surge of consciousness in society. We're feeling all these weird pressures from social media, the internet, the government, the mainstream media, the news, and things like that. We're what can be seen as sort of an oppression of sorts, like especially this whole Me Too movement. And I'm not going to discount that women should speak up. I think that they should. I think women have it tough in a world full of traditional male values, and us men, we've grown up with some really crazy ideas that certain things are okay. And you having a daughter and me having a niece and my sister, the women in our lives, we want to feel safe when they're out there in the world. But there's this weird thing happening where you do have to watch what you say and how you interact with normal moments in your life, especially around women, for the sake of this particular topic. But I think it's hard to navigate in such a dynamic shift in consciousness, but the only way to really mitigate yourself in that, and I'm learning this right now because like I said, I'm getting frustrated seeing certain things on Facebook, certain things are upsetting me. Well, the only thing I can do is create a space that's safe for me to say what I need to say, and also ensure that people in my direct circle benefit from my exchanges with them.
Sure.
It's the only thing I can do to make things progress.
Yeah, staying with the Me Too thing, and like you said, I have a daughter and a wife and a mom, and and some of the one of the strongest people I've ever met is my mom. I mean, she raised me virtually by herself, and I've never once heard her claim to be a victim. My mom did 20 years in the military. 18, went into the Navy, did 20 years, got out of the Navy, got a minimum wage job, and worked her way up from there. Had 2 jobs at one point, raising me by herself. Never once heard her claim to be a victim. Never once heard her complain about anything. And she just put in the work, and now she's extremely successful, and just a high school diploma, and that was that. And she just kind of did her thing. So she's one of the people that I look to for inspiration. And some of the stuff that's going on with this Me Too movement. So there's multiple phases of feminism, right? There's first wave feminism, which is like basic, like women should be allowed to vote. Like that's just simple. Like, yeah, everybody would agree with that. Women should have equal access and equal rights that men have. Like, I don't think there's anybody that can't get behind that. But we have since now gone into second wave, and now even worse is third wave feminism, where it's like, believe all women. And it's just like, wait a minute. Like, I as a cop, I hear claims of rape and claims of this and that all the time. And I'm not saying that the things that they're saying aren't true. And they even may believe that they were raped sometimes. But when I start to investigate these types of claims, and we start to go into it, and we start to ask the specific questions that let us know whether something happened or something didn't happen as best as they can remember, sometimes it isn't as what they say it is. Sometimes their terminology of things isn't what they say it is. And sometimes it just completely just didn't happen. And I'm not saying that they're lying. Sometimes they do lie. Sometimes they misremember. Sometimes they're telling the truth. But that's the same thing for women can be applied to men. We should treat everybody the same. We shouldn't put one person's perspective and opinion above another person's perspective and opinion. We should investigate, see what the facts are, see what the evidence is, and then come to an opinion. But this instantly jumping to conclusions when we hear something without waiting just a second, just wait a second, and let's hear what this person has to say and why they're saying it, I think is a better recipe for success. Because I think it's very foolish just to believe all women, because by stint of saying believe all women, you're now then saying that we must condemn all men. And
Yes.
that's very problematic in my estimation.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I think that's what I'm dealing with, is how to interpret this whole thing. Because I know that, growing up, there had been times where I'm with a group of guys and we all see the same woman walk by, and the urge to react to it as a group is overwhelming, or has been overwhelming. And then looking back, based on what's going on now, and looking back, there's this shame factor, right? That I feel the need to address first and foremost, because shame doesn't do anybody any good. However, I think there's value in recognizing that the eruption of this movement, so to speak, is a way for the male species to sort of kind of reevaluate our old traditional perspectives. And I mean, I still nowadays still have to kind of catch myself, because I'll be around another guy who is older and does come from another reality. And there's this camaraderie that happens, which I think to some degree is okay.
Well, some of that's biology.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing, is like, you can't control every aspect of this reaction. And the other thing is, women are offended a lot of times. Let's say they put themselves out there to attract, and they design their presence to be such, to be more attractive, whether it's perfume, whether it's a specific outfit, or what have you. And then they'll go out and say, well, I didn't dress this way for so-and-so to stare at me. Well, I think this is another one of those things where people that aren't necessarily mentally fit are exposed to something that isn't necessarily for them to indulge in. In other words, a woman is okay with okay with attracting an attractive guy, and would all day justify, well, yeah, I knew I would pull him in by this outfit or whatever. But when there's an unattractive male who is then, in that same space, or participating in some way in her attempt, then it's offensive or borderline harassment, or can be interpreted as such, which is a very dangerous thing. So I think it's important for men and women to talk this out, and to really come to an understanding. Like, we're guys, we're primates in nature. We have our urgencies, and or what have you. Right. But that's just another, on the topic of words and the empowerment of such, or disempowerment, or what have you. It's one of those things where we're squeezing the juice out of it yet again as a society.
Yeah, so men historically have been pretty awful towards women, especially in modern society.
Yeah.
We have basically treated them as lesser than, and we're now at a time when we're trying to get moved beyond that, and everybody's treated fair, but we in general are still trying to navigate how to interact with one another, especially in terms of what we as a society deem is appropriate and acceptable. I don't think we're there yet. Yeah. Obviously, we're seeing that, like you just described. You see an attractive female who is now accentuating things about her that is even highlighting more of the things that make her attractive, and it's like, well, now she's now out in public, and now everybody's going to look, and you have to reasonably expect that is what's going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean that she then deserves to be catcalled or sexually assaulted. That's not necessarily, that doesn't mean that, but we as a society, you should reasonably expect that. Unfortunately, with how people are, that is a potential that could happen, and you navigate that accordingly. Some women, it's worth the risk. Some women like it. Some women, it's just the worst thing ever, and that's fine. All of those things are fine, but we are still trying to figure out how to interact with one another, and we're navigating the realms of what's acceptable versus what's not acceptable, and especially in the workplace. I mean, that is something that we're still trying to figure out. You're only talking like 60 years of men and women being in the workplace together like how it is today. Like, that wasn't a thing. And some of these jobs didn't even exist 60 or 70 years ago. So now you're having all these office jobs where men and women are kind of confined in closed quarters. And you have, I mean, there's for romance to occur, you need very few things. It's proximity, attractiveness, and, you know, that's pretty much it. And so now you're seeing people kind of get into these spaces because that attractiveness may be only one way, and the chemistry may be only one way, and people are starting to get into trouble, and then people with power are starting to get into trouble, and it's this thing that we're still trying to navigate. And it's Jordan Peterson talks about this a little bit, in that, you know, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't do it or why they do it, but when women wear makeup or they wear lipstick, they're accentuating physiological parts of their body they're going to have biological responses in the opposite sex, i.e. men, that are going to trigger a response. I'm not saying that what comes as a result of that is acceptable, but to ignore this is something
irresponsible.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's anyone's fault.
Sure, of course.
But these are facts.
Yeah.
And if we ignore these facts, like you said, it's irresponsible.
Yeah. And in your job as a police officer, the trends that are in the media, such as Me Too movement, racism, do these enhance your situations on the job? I mean, when you respond to situations where a woman feels violated, like you had described in terms of, you know, whether raped or not, do people placate towards this in some way or another, as far as they use it to their advantage? Or, I mean, is every situation similar to what it was before all this was going on? I mean, I'm just curious how mainstream media translates in real life situations with a police officer.
I think it depends, because if the media gets involved in a situation that we're investigating, then obviously it changes the nature of it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's good or bad. It just definitely changes the nature between an interaction, because sometimes, because politics is a thing. Like, as much as I wish that politics didn't invade some of the things that we do, there are optics. There are the optics of things and how they play out definitely is something to be aware of. And if the media is involved in a high profile type of situation, then that may influence how we respond. It's not going to necessarily dictate, you know, the laws that are applied or not applied or what we do, but how we handle that situation may change depending on the severity of what we're talking about. But for me, one of the big things is someone will say this thing happened. You know, and the laws have, every law has specific words in it, and that will be, you know, in order for this crime to occur, this whole subset of things must be there. It's like, okay, so someone will say, well, you know, someone raped me. Okay, well, rape is penis to vaginal penetration, however slight. Like, your penis going into someone's vagina, like even just a little bit against their will, is considered a rape. Okay, so then I'll start talking, and I won't obviously, you know, read them the dictionary version of a rape to them, but I'll talk to them knowing this in my head. Well, what happened? And then they'll tell me this thing, and I mean, very, very few times when someone has told me they have been raped, have they actually been raped? Have they even actually had, you know, penis to vaginal penetration at all? It's just unfortunately it's a term that gets flung around very loosely, and it's not even something that necessarily may have happened. So
just so I understand, there has to be some sort of penis and vaginal contact in order for it to qualify as rape?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, for rape. But now, obviously.
Well, what if there is no penis, but everything else, like hands where they shouldn't be?
Then now
ripping of clothes.
Yeah. Now you're
sexual.
Now you're describing a sexual assault.
Oh,
it's a different crime.
Interesting.
So yeah,
I don't think I understood the
a lot of people don't, and that's the thing is that they'll say, "Oh, I was raped," and it's like, "Well, what happened?" Well, someone put their finger inside of my vagina. Oh, okay. Well, we're not talking about a rape. I'm not saying that it's. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's obviously it's not.
I get it.
Yeah. It's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it happens from time to time. But that's not what that is. That's something else. And so that's the thing. So I have to listen to people's stories.
Yeah.
And I then sometimes will educate them based on what they're telling me. And sometimes people just don't remember. I think I was raped. I don't remember. I drank a lot. I blacked out. Okay. Well, how do you feel? Well, what do you mean? Well, does your vagina hurt? Because, there's certain things, especially with women, obviously, when they have sex, they can tell generally when something has penetrated them. And so those are some of the questions that we'll ask them. Does your vagina hurt? And they'll be like, well, yes or no. And then we'll go to the hospital and we'll kind of do a whole exam to kind of see if something that was there. Sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not the case. But there's specific questions that we ask when we do these investigations to determine what the heck is going on. And a lot of times, sometimes the things that people say happen don't happen. And so, going back to kind of the other things we were talking about is, especially like when the Brett Kavanaugh thing was going on, and it was crazy to me because I people were ready to condemn this guy for something that
decades ago.
Yeah, you're talking 30 years ago, and I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying, but if you're going to come out with an allegation that's 30 years old, and then every shred of evidence or people that you want to corroborate your story are like, I don't remember any of that. And you don't have any real articulable facts to back up your claim, I don't understand how we can then destroy a man's future career as a result of that. Because if that's the case, then anybody can start alleging anybody did anything. And then now it's our whole due process system. That's what's beautiful about the system is that we have due process. You're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
The onus is on the accuser, not the person who is accused.
Yeah.
To provide a defense as to why they didn't do this thing. That doesn't work. And it's easy to see how corruptible a system like that would be. And that is extremely problematic.
Well, with the media's effect on things, that certainly bred what we witnessed with Brett Kavanaugh's situation. The media controversy relies on ignorance, and unfortunately there's a huge production of ignorance going on in the world, and the media placates to that.
Yeah, and emotion.
Right. And yeah, it's just something for people to latch onto, unfortunately. But the importance of us talking about this is I'm now, as a citizen of this community, able to kind of dig into what I'm only witness to through media and to ask you these questions. And for the sake of rape situations, most men, I would assume, and I know how dangerous that is to do, think that any situation where a woman cries for help, whether justified or not, is going to condemn them off the bat. And that's not necessarily true. It sounds like due process or protocol for a police officer is to follow through these steps to ensure that actual rape or actual sexual assault did occur. Yeah. And that's through every case, and that's how you're trained and every other police officer in this community or statewide. And I'm, again, assuming that nationwide, this is how things are run in a police department.
Well, yeah. Even in something like that, we always treat it as if it did happen. Like any crime that anybody alleges, it's like, okay, we investigate it as if it did happen. Because obviously, if we even if how absurd, and sometimes you can dismiss things on their face because it's like, well, that doesn't even make any sense. But if someone's saying, well, I was raped, then we automatically, okay, well, what happened? And we go into the investigation and treat it as if what that person is saying is valid, even if we ourselves may have doubts just based on what they're describing to us. But we always will treat an investigation, or we should. I mean, police should treat it as if this is a legitimate thing. And then through the course of questioning and an investigation, it may come out to be that, well, that didn't happen, unfortunately, or fortunately. But I think men violence. So this kind of transitioning here, kind of going back to what you were saying about men in general. I this whole thing of men are toxic masculinity too kind of translates into how men treat women and this and that. But for as every time there is a man who disrespects women, there's usually always a man there who is there to protect women. And this is, I've always seen this, and this goes way beyond the Me Too movement. There have always been men that have always seen some of the actions of other men towards women abhorrent, and they stand up to them and they say something. Sometimes they don't, but there have always been good men there to defend the honor and dignity of women. Yeah, always throughout history.
Yeah, and I think that gets overlooked real easily nowadays. The fact that it's not always been evil in men all the time, that there are good men standing by in every situation. I think what I'm learning or hearing in this conversation is that the media is certainly not some viable source to judge everyday life. And I think that's a mistake I personally have made is, the exposure I give myself to media then translates into my reality, then puts space between me and certain individuals, so to speak, because of this facade that I've adapted into my reality. But I'm learning as we talk what's real and what's not, which is...
Well, the thing about the media is that the media is also, it's funny because there's this perception that the media back in the day used to be, they used to have a lot more journalistic integrity. They were less biased. And I do think back in the day they had a lot more journalistic integrity. They would vet their sources before coming out with a story. But I think with today, how social media is and how fast the news story is, that people are just looking to get information out there as humanly fast as possible. But back in the day, your Walter Cronkites and some of these other esteemed journalists were biased too. Yeah. They were able to, and because you didn't have as many resources as you do today, you kind of just took their word for what they were telling you. Now with today, there's just so many different news sources, and I think that you can't just read any one news source and take it as gospel. You kind of have to read a variety of different news sources, and then if it's depending on the type of story there is, if it's like a law story where the results of a case are public record, it may even be worth your while to go read the case itself and read the judge's opinion or the dissents or whatever, and kind of form your own opinion, because there's just too many biases going on. And what I try to do is I try to read sources from both sides and try to figure out my own perspective of what I'm reading, because I think that if a lot of people kind of get, and we all do it, we all get wrapped up in confirmation bias, where we have a perspective and we usually will seek sources out that can reaffirm and confirm our preconceived biases, and that can be problematic if you then stay within your own echo chamber. Yeah. And then because now you're just reinforcing things you already believe, and those things may not even be based in truth or reality, but because you have this kind of perception, or you're scratching at the surface of something, you read something that kind of reaffirms, now you're stuck.
Because you kind of want to believe.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it.
It's easier to do that than to investigate, because you have to invest time.
Exactly.
And not a lot of people have time.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense. I'm guilty of that personally.
Oh, we all are. I mean, that's the hardest. That's the thing that I try to remind myself to do the most is like, okay, I need to go out and read the other side of this, or see the other side of this, to make sure that what I'm thinking is along the lines of, hey, this is kind of, I don't understand why these guys are thinking this, but I need to investigate why they're thinking this in order to kind of dismiss what they're saying, or even just to better understand what they're saying, even if I believe they're wrong.
Yeah. And I could, we're going to have to do this more than once. Yeah, because I have questions that I'm not even aware of at this time in terms of, law enforcement and reality and the media. I I noticed you checked your time. Do we have you have a
we're good.
limit?
No,
You're
no.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have work or anything
Nope.
later?
Not today.
Okay. Cool. So that kind of leads me to, I'm safe to talk with politically because I'm here to learn.
Sure.
And I'm not going to tell you what's true and what's not true. Okay. My job is to investigate information from a trustworthy source, which is what I believe I have happening right now.
Sure.
That being said, I recently saw a news stint on Trump and, let's say, the trade wars with China or trade agreements or whatever. There's been some sort of a truce reached between Xi or whatever and Trump. There's so much endless controversy on Trump, impeachment stories and rumors and things. And there's a lot of adversity towards our very own leader or president. But I've heard you express that you are a Trump supporter to some degree or full degree or whatever. From my own benefit, what is your take on, to narrow it down, his best effects on current government? What is his, what do you deem as the strongest quality in his administration? And what would you, let's say we opened up the opportunity for you to persuade somebody so that you could, better the community, the reality that you support by trying to, let's say, convert somebody. What would you say if that was okay in many instances, which it's not most of the time? Sure. But let's say I'm open to that. What would you say to me to convince me that Trump is actually good for the United States?
Right. So even more importantly than Trump, because Trump's just is a polarizing and controversial figure, and I think it's better to look at it in terms of conservatism versus liberalism, left versus right, because I think that kind of influences kind of why one may support Trump versus one not supporting Trump. Because if you look at Trump the character, it's really easy to look at him as a vile, despicable human being. When in a lot of ways, I think he is that. I mean, I think his behavior towards women is immoral. I think I hate the pettiness of the constant tweeting and all of that. There's a lot of things about Trump that I just do not like. However, if you start to look at it from a policy perspective and you start to look at my own personal values, because I'm conservative, and I think that a lot of police officers tend to be conservative because we believe in law and we believe in rule and order and things of that nature.
Yeah, big on structure.
Yeah, which are tend to be very conservative values, right? Because the whole conservatism is about preserving the Constitution, and which is our founding document. And I was actually listening to something the other day that most constitutions are like 17 years old. Ours is like going on like 200 and something years old. So we are definitely the exception to the rule. And I think the reason why that is because when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, it was a very, very well thought out document. They didn't want any one area of government to have omnipotent power. They wanted it to be balanced. They wanted each facet of government to check each other. They wanted the judicial to be checked by the legislative and the executive, and they wanted the executive to be checked by the judicial and the legislative. They wanted the legislative to be checked by the judicial and the executive. They wanted these things. That was one of the things that they were really, really concerned about. And so when we look at things from that perspective, and then obviously they got things wrong. I mean, a lot of the people, the founding fathers and people that wrote the Constitution owned slaves. But the weird thing is, it's not weird, but I tend to believe that some of them weren't huge fans of slavery, because there's not one time through the Constitution of the Declaration of Independence or anything is the word slave in there. It said all men are created equal. Now, that may not have applied in their time, but they wrote language like that so future generations can interpret the word men, what does that mean? Who are these men? The word man or woman isn't in the Constitution either. So it's men, people. And people have interpreted that as time has gone on to mean, well, that meant black people. And that means women. And that means, everybody else in between. And so conservatives, by and large, tend to fall back on that as a guiding document as to kind of where we go. Whereas the left, or I tend to see more of founding fathers were racist. And, some of them were, but they're racist. They own slaves. Therefore, we need to tear down all the Jefferson memorials. And it's just like, wait a minute. We can't look at the lens. We can't look at yesterday through the lens of today. That's just not how it works. Because people are going to do the same thing 50 years from now. They're going to look back on us now, and they're going to be like, well, what the hell were you guys thinking when you guys were eating cows or whatever? So that's kind of how I look at it for starters. And so now kind of fast forwarding to today, what does that conservatism mean? It's like, well, for me, I think we need to protect the border. You have to, because a country or a sovereign nation without borders is not a sovereign nation. You're just kind of a place. And if we're not willing to protect the border and just allow anybody to come in, unvetted is the biggest thing, then that can lead to problems. Because one of the beautiful things about America is the ability to come here. People from all over the world throughout history have come here with nothing and have been able to become ultra successful. But there is a certain assimilation that should occur. And there's also a certain, we need to believe in these values that, hey, we can come here and we can do virtually anything. And what's great about the American dream is the ability to do that. So we should be able to do these things and come over here and do these things and do it the right way. And obviously there's controversy of, we stole this land, and and there's a bunch of revisionist history in there that kind of gets overlooked. We won't get into that. We can do that another time. But specifically in terms of securing the border is, we need to make sure the people that are coming here aren't murderers and aren't the evil people that, we already have enough of in this country, unfortunately. So we need to make sure we're not just letting them other people in. And we also, because we're not talking about the farmer that just wants to come here to make a better life for him and his family. Like, those people tend to be in the people that come across. But how do we know? We have to check each individual person, check their story, see if they are one of these good people that we do want. Mm-hmm. But there's a process for that. Yeah. And we have to do that. And so one of the things that Trump is doing and trying to do is just that. It's like, hey, we just can't have this floodgate of people come in to this country unchecked. That's going to lead to problems. And then on top of it, and it's not even just about Trump. It's kind of, you got to kind of look at the other side of the equation too. It's like, well, Trump's saying this. Well, what are these other people saying that oppose him? And they're talking about, well, yeah, they should just get to come, and we won't deport people. And it's like, well, what do you mean? They came to our country illegally. And on top of it, some of them have criminal history, and some of them commit crimes while they're here, and we're unwilling to deport them. And it's like, well, okay, well, that's weird. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, I think that can lead to disaster too. And then now you're actively going against some of the federal mandates, like ICE sweeps and raids. And you have certain states like ours, California, where then Attorney General Kamala Harris is talking about how, well, we're just not going to obey any federal law enforcement orders to detain, illegal immigrants or even deport them. And it's just like, well, wait a minute. Even people that are guilty multiple times of committing violent offenses, and people that have come here and been deported multiple times, we're just going to protect those people? That doesn't really make sense.
So just to,
Yeah.
if I can interject real
Yeah, go
quick, the idea of vetting people on their way in
Mm-hmm.
is important. In order to kind of, I don't know, smooth it out in the transition of sending them or deporting them,
Mm-hmm.
is there a possibility that we could vet the ones who are already here illegally and keep the ones that are productive? And let's say the ones with a rap sheet longer than your arm need to go back. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so so what you're talking about is like a pathway to citizenship.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there should be a pathway to citizenship.
Yeah.
But the only way that pathway to citizenship works is if there's some order, and we have to get the order first before we can start determining, okay, well, this person is just here to provide for their family. Also, another thing too is, people that are seeking asylum are coming from countries in the middle of South America, and they're traveling through multiple countries to get to America, which kind of doesn't make sense in and of itself, because it's like, well, you're leaving one country, and because this country is so terrible, the conditions in this country are terrible, the violence in this country is terrible, and I can completely empathize with you. But you shouldn't just get to traverse multiple countries just to get to America. Theoretically, you should go to the next country to seek asylum that is theoretically better than the country you're leaving, because that's the whole point of you leaving the country. So if your point is to seek asylum in the next to create a better condition for you, then you theoretically shouldn't just get to traverse multiple countries just to get to America, even if America is the best country to get to. I mean, it's the best country in the world. So from that standard, every single country has conditions that aren't conducive to what you would want to see living in America. And if we don't have, and it's funny because I was reading something the other day that was saying that, well, if we're not going to have, basically customs at the border, then what's the point of having customs in airports? If people are coming in from countries all over the world, and we're basically saying, well, we don't really need people to go through customs at the border, that's just not a thing, then there's really no need to have people go through customs at the airports either. And what's to stop everybody from coming from all these other countries all over the world, getting this free healthcare that they're now a lot of the Democratic presidential candidates are now offering or saying that they want to do, is give illegal immigrants free healthcare. What's to stop any country from just sending an immigrant over here to get their healthcare and then them leaving?
Well, the focus is obviously on Mexico. So, I mean...
Right, but that has to apply everywhere.
Of course. But that's too logical, for this crowd of outrage.
Right. So kind of going back to Trump, right? That's kind of where it goes. It's like, okay, what are my options? Well, my options are this kind of immoral guy who just kind of says things off the cuff, and he's just kind of nuts, really. But he's talking about policies that I actually support, versus even people that seemingly are more righteous as far as their character, but their policies are kind of things that are just things that I don't support, and they're kind of insane. So it's like, what do you do when you're faced with that? And for me, I kind of have to go with the policy, because at the end of the day, that is what that person theoretically is going to enact, and that's what's going to be the rule of the land. Right. And so I have to get with that before I can get with the the foolishness that I wish that he wouldn't be saying. Like I wish he would just stop the tweeting. I wish he would just stop the divisive rhetoric, because a lot of it is divisive.
Do you think it's self-indulgent or strategic?
I don't know. I mean, I guess that's that's just it, man. I guess the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. Yeah. And so maybe the guy is just a genius. I do think Trump is extremely intelligent. I think that I think that one of the reasons why he got elected was because of the way he speaks plainly. Yeah. He's unapologetic. Yeah. And a lot of that I do like. I do like the fact that he's unapologetic in some things, because I think that we have gotten into this culture of outrage and everybody apologizes for everything. And if you apologize for something, then that means you admit your wrongdoing. We must destroy you. And it's just like, Jesus Christ, that's a hard that's a hard way to live in a society.
Yeah,
with
that's supposed to be free.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like, and I do like the fact that he's unapologetic, and I think that's why people resonated towards him, because they're sick of politicians, because
Right.
politicians talk a good talk and they say things and they sound.
I mean,
real
it's in the
polished.
propaganda. When you see their campaign on television, it's outright manipulative and just such a poisonous thing to have in your view. It's so bad. So, yeah, to add to that, when he took office and it solidified that, being flamboyantly honest the way he was, and maybe not so well spoken, it made it feel, for me, like a breath of fresh air. It was like, oh, thank God, somebody's willing to be their nasty, true, honest self. And that's a big change.
Yeah, for better or for worse,
Yeah.
whatever that means,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
no, I could.
That's a part of the evolution, though. I think that's it seems a little rough around the edges, but the essence of what happened there is important for every individual in this country to understand that you need to be yourself if you want the best outcome. Don't put on a charade and act like this other thing and then show up. I mean, everybody experiences that in their career. You'll see somebody go through the hiring process all the way to putting on the uniform in whatever career field that is. And then not too long after that, or maybe, later down the line, you see their true character surface. And that is so disheartening. That's such a stupid, ignorant surprise, because it's like we all decided to shove that under the rug and let our guards down. And now here we are dealing with the truth. I'd much rather have that truth up front, find out that they're a loud, obnoxious person and kind of, mitigate that in the workplace
100%.
and say, listen, you got to tone it down. It's easier to tone it down than to, turn it up sometimes.
No, for sure. And I think that a lot of people these days we're not being honest with one another, like you just said. I mean, and it's funny. But before all of this, like growing up, I always used to say, like I'm grateful for a white supremacist point of view. It's like, if you're a white supremacist, tell me. Like, that's fine. Like, I will obviously disagree with you, because I will disagree with your perspective, but I will always respect your ability to have your own perspective. You're able to do that.
Yeah.
And at least if you're a white supremacist and you're like, I'm a white supremacist, okay, I know where I stand with you. I don't need to mess with you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go over here.
Yeah.
You go over there. And as long as your white supremacy is just, rhetoric, and you're not actually actively
Violence isn't in that recipe, then we're good.
okay. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
cool.
Agreed.
I know where you stand.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know where I stand. So I'm gonna go stand over here.
Sure.
And you can go do your thing.
Yeah.
But if we're now forced to retreat into, the dark recesses of the internet, and you're not able to share your perspective, and if you do, you're just excoriated, or you're run out of society, or canceled, as it were, is what the term is now, because you misstep and you're not considered sufficiently woke, then I just don't know how we can survive. And basically there's this Overton window, which is the window of, discourse that's acceptable. But we're continuing to shrink this window, because now if you say certain things, and it's just like, well, now you're a racist, bigot, homophobe, homophobe, as some of the people that I like to listen to used to say, basically. And it's true that, like, if I say, like, for instance, like one of the dumber things that I've heard nowadays is that if you're so basically, say you take a straight guy, okay, you have this straight guy, and you now introduce a trans woman to the situation, basically a male who thinks that they're a female, and who has, let's say they have transitioned to being a female. If that straight male doesn't find that straight or that transgender female attractive, or is unwilling to date that trans female, now there's this thing going around that now that person is transphobic. And it's just like, how in the hell? Like, why can't I just have my preference? I prefer biological women. Just because I don't want to date, or I refuse to kiss, or even be attracted to a trans woman, how does that make me transphobic? Like, I'm allowed to have my preferences.
Yeah, I mean, you're phobic to anything you don't like.
Right. Which doesn't even make sense. The whole phobia word in and of itself, because a phobia is an irrational fear of something.
Sure, yeah.
I'm not afraid of trans people. I just prefer to date biological women.
Yeah.
That should be okay. I don't understand.
It's just branding, hate trends.
Yeah.
That's all. They just, grouping people together, like-minded complainers.
Right. And that's it. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's being perpetually positive. I said at some point before I said I was cursed with positivity. That's just how I see things. Call it a blessing, if you will.
Sure.
But one of the great things about where we're at in society, based on our conversation alone, where I think, where if somebody was listening, how they could assess things here on the planet. One of the wonderful things is that if you're aware of things the way you are, or the way I am, it creates this sort of playground for us because, as a peace officer, it's a little bit different for you because you're under watch. I mean, everything you do can be put under the microscope, which, I don't envy that position. However, I'm extremely grateful that there are individuals like yourself. And to be honest, I was a little relieved when the police department didn't sign me up. And I think as I look back, I think there was a part of me that didn't necessarily want that to work out. Because I think in the space where I want to experience success, there may be a little more flamboyancy. There may be a little bit more free-flowing, what have you. I don't know. But I feel that I could have gotten myself in trouble had I had certain perimeters or parameters in place. Let's, for instance, and I'll be open and honest about this, they want to know what kind of porn you watch. They dig in to certain things about you, and it puts you in an insecure space of like, I can't just do whatever and be whatever, even in my own, most private moments, because I'm under a microscope. Which that'll lead me to another question about the law enforcement hiring process. But back into the positive outlook, I feel like things are on the up and up. I think that our demographic of age that we belong to is on the forefront of some significant change in the grand consciousness that we exist in, the people that we affiliate ourselves with, which we get to choose. It's exciting to me. Yeah. It's exciting that we can have conversations about all these things and at the end of the day laugh about a lot of it.
And I think that people, quite frankly, are just getting tired of the way that information is being presented to them, where these long form conversations are actually starting to kind of take root. I mean, look, obviously, there's all of the people that we all listen to, the Joe Rogans, the Dak Shepherds, the Adam Carollas, the Jordan Petersons, the Ben Shapiros, and even some of the other people on the other side, like, the Pod Save America guys. And there's all of these people that have these platforms that people are listening to. You're talking, people are listening to hours-long conversations of people just talking because it's fascinating. And you get to get an insight as to what people are thinking, why they think it, and especially if you have somebody that's, asking questions, who's naturally inquisitive, like a Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's an extremely inquisitive individual, and he's just curious. And so he just asks these questions, and he's extremely intelligent himself. And so depending on who he's talking to, he may have intimate knowledge of a thing, and, they'll talk. And it's really, really fascinating. You're having people subscribe to this. I mean, this type of forum is really taking off, and you're starting to see a lot of people kind of engage in that. But going back to you as you becoming a police officer or not becoming a police officer, I think that's important. I think it's important for people to recognize if that's for them. And, for you, it may not have been, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes there are people that become police officers that shouldn't become police officers because they do it for all the wrong reasons. Some people will do it for, whatever their reasons
just
are.
to have a gun at their hip.
Yes, and there's definitely that.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a cool aspect of, we get to carry a gun, and, the veneer of that, wears off over time, and it becomes a tool that you may or may not have to use. Hopefully you don't ever have to use it, but it's a tool that, if the unfortunate circumstance presents itself, that, we will use. And sometimes people are quicker to that than others. And sometimes that's just lack of training. And I mean, there's a whole host of things that occur. And I think sometimes people look at things too black and white and don't consider the vast, overwhelming variables that go into each individual encounter, and they start comparing encounters, and like you can't necessarily do that because the circumstances that were present for one encounter may not have been present for another encounter, and you're talking different people. What I may use force for, it may not be something that you use force for, and either one of those is wrong. It just depends on the circumstance. It depends on that person's abilities. It depends on a variety of other things too. It depends on the other person that they're presented with and what they're doing. And so there's so many variables that go into this that people don't necessarily consider. Even people that are doing the job. I've always said that there's good cops that make bad decisions sometimes. There's bad cops that obviously make bad decisions. There's incompetent cops that make bad decisions. There's bad cops that make good decisions. There's all kinds of different cops. There's all kinds of different people in every area of life. Some of those same people become doctors, lawyers, politicians, or whatever.
This is way too rational for most folks.
I know. I'm sorry, man, but this is just how I kind of see it.
You got to stop using so much logic.
I know. It's a curse.
You're not feeding the beast here. Yeah.
I'm sorry, man.
Don't be, man.
It just doesn't make sense to me that people don't rationalize this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And everybody and I get it, man. Like, especially with the police. So, obviously I'm a black police officer, right? For whatever that's worth, whatever that means, how relevant that tends to be. But I think it's also important too to look at and recognize the history of policing in this country, right? There was a point in time in this country when things were very different for black people, right? In the Jim Crow South, there were laws on the books that, basically black people couldn't do X. Well, if that law was broken, who would they call? Well, they would call the police. So the police would come in and enforce these racist laws. And by and large, I'm pretty sure that a lot of those police officers were racist themselves. So they had no problem doing it. Yeah, these black people shouldn't be doing this. And, we're going to come and we're going to, go do our thing, right? But part of me also believes that not all of these cops were racist, even though they had a charge to do a racist to enforce a racist law. I don't know if that's good or bad or what that is, but I think that is part of it. And sometimes I think that you probably had these people who weren't racist who started doing this job and enforcing these racist laws, and through like an indoctrination process and almost a pseudo brainwashing, if you will, became racist themselves. And I'm pretty sure that the reverse of that is true too. You had people that were racist started doing this job and started kind of feeling for the humanity of the people that they were having to, carry out these racist laws against, started to kind of feel for them and became less racist as time went on. I think there's so many different types of people. And I think that we don't give enough credit to that when we're talking about police specifically in this particular conversation. And it baffles me that we don't allow for that. And, it's just a thing that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But I get the emotional responses, especially in the black community, to why when they see a police shooting, to why it's instantly racism. And it's just like, well, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Like, let's look at
anything's possible.
Right. That is a possibility in the hundreds of millions of different variables that exist, and that cop may have been racist. But that doesn't necessarily mean the thing that he did in this particular instance, in this circumstance, was a racist thing. Like, there's that is possible too. And I think that if we look, there's police brutality that happens, and there's racist police, and sometimes racist police are white, sometimes they're black, sometimes they're this, sometimes they're that. It doesn't, there's all kinds of different types of cops. And I think if we looked at things honestly, looked at the facts of things, then we can combat actual police brutality and actual racist police on a case-by-case basis. And you will have, I guarantee you, there won't be any cop in this nation, unless they happen to be the cop that subscribes to the racism and the police brutality, that won't stand against this. But the problem is that anytime we have a white cop and a black offender or victim or whatever, then it instantly becomes politically charged and it's a racist thing. And even if you look in the news, like news headings, it's white cop shoots black male. And it's just like how does that serve to get to the bottom of if was this particular act racist or not?
Yeah.
And if we were to take each individual instance, look at the facts, and then go from there and then assess whether a thing was justifiable or not, then I think we would be in a much better place, because I think that if everything is racist, then nothing is racist. And it makes it much harder to fight actual racism in the police, or more specifically police brutality, because I don't think it just goes from white cops to black cops. I think police brutality obviously exists, but white people are victims of police brutality. Mexicans are victims of police brutality. Everybody's victims of police brutality. So I think that's kind of the thing that we should focus on.
What do you think could help support the resolution of police brutality, or do you think that it is unresolvable? That it is just a flaw in trying to police the world as is? I mean, is it impossible that could ever go away? Is it a mental illness thing? Do you think that cops have enough resources to deal with the trauma and the, however minute that trauma may be, whether it's just in a conversational exchange with a citizen, there's some traumatic effect to adversity they may face in those situations, small or big. Do you think there's enough resources that cops have to deal with those issues? Or is that what happens in brutality situations, is that these cops have things that add up that ultimately that explode? I always want to remain neutral about every instance, because like you just explained, everything deserves the opportunity to be put under a microscope and looked at in its own specific situation.
Yeah. First of all, as far as the resources, there can always be more. I think that we as a society are really starting to understand post-traumatic stress, and really are really starting to focus now, especially in this industry, in mental health and kind of talking about your feelings and things like that, which are really, really important things that we should be doing. But that's not a thing that, hell, even in the military, you look at these guys, man, you have these guys that would just go into these horrible, horrendous situations. They're going to Nazi Germany and Vietnam, and it was kind of a taboo to kind of talk about your feelings and talk about the things you've seen, and then you would repress them. Same thing in law enforcement. That was kind of a thing. Like, you would have this horrific ordeal that you would just, and it could be something as simple as you see someone get hit by a car, and it's not, obviously that's very different than going into trench warfare, but it's still a traumatic thing to see nonetheless. And everybody processes things differently. Some people are okay seeing horrific things like that and can process it differently than people that can't. And so we as an industry, and I can't speak to other departments even in this state, but even across the country, I think California is one of the leading places as far as law enforcement for the country. The access that we have and the things that we do are kind of revolutionary as far as, and the diversity that that too that you have. So California is very much one of the thought leaders as far as some of these concepts that we're talking about. And my department specifically, we do have access to therapists, and we have peer supports, and it's important to talk about these things, the things that we see, because the things that we see aren't freaking normal, like that people should be seeing on a daily consistent basis. Same thing with like doctors, and same things with like nurses, and and firefighters, we end up having kind of twisted and dark senses of humor, because that's one of the coping mechanisms that we have, and we may be laughing about something fully understanding the morbid. This is a terrible thing that may have happened. However, in order for us to go on to the next thing that's just as morbid, or the next thing and the next thing, and then have to go talk to a little kid and not just be just a mess. We cope in those ways too.
Sure.
And so we kind of make light of morbid situations in order for us to be able to deal with it. And I don't know if people quite wrap their head around that too. But as far as your other question of, do I think that we'll ever get rid of it? I think we could always be better. I think that understanding the people in the community that you're policing is a huge part of it. But I think that the community also has to understand the other aspect of it too.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I'll hear, well, police need more training. Police need more training. And okay, fine, we can have as much training as you want us to have, but we're not the only part of this equation.
Yep.
There's the other side of the equation too that we have no control over. And despite our training, if we're not accounting for the other half of this equation, things can still go wrong. And I think that it needs to go both ways. If you're going to have a community get better, it requires all members of the community being willing to understand each other and work together. You can't just expect one portion of the community to be responsible for getting the entire community getting better.
Yes.
That will never work.
Uniform or not.
Yeah, it doesn't. It won't. It just won't work.
Right.
Because it requires everybody. Everybody's in the community, so it requires all of the community to kind of figure it out. But as far as the police brutality is concerned, yeah, I think we can get better. I think we as an industry need to be better about policing our own. And if we see something that is, questionable, having the courage to kind of step up and say something and in some instances do something. There obviously was this, for a long time, this, blue wall that kind of we just, didn't really just kind of let people do their thing. But there was and with that being said too, there have always been police officers that have stood up to bad police officers. It's just it's a hard thing to do. That's a hard position to be in to check one of your own, especially in a circumstance like that. I mean, I challenge almost anybody to have to do that with anybody. I mean, that's a very hard thing to do.
Right.
But that is something that we are charged with to do. So in the event that does come up, that is one of our responsibilities, is we have to check this person and we have to do what we kind of have to do, whatever that looks like. But unfortunately, with human nature is human nature, and we will always have bad apples, and it's unfortunate. But I think if I'm thinking about this, and if I'm kind of being honest, I think that's the unfortunate truth of the matter. So I think hiring practices kind of weed a lot of those types of people out, and there are other ways. There are other ways to
Amazon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I wonder what that is. There are other ways to do it, but human beings will always have a tendency to be corruptible.
Yeah.
And unfortunately.
Totally. And I agree with you. I only ask the impossible because I don't want to interject my perspective just yet, but I do personally believe that it doesn't matter if it ever will go away. What matters is that we acknowledge that things can be better and
Absolutely.
that we make an effort to change. And I was going to ask you, is there, for instance, that you can share where you've had to check a fellow officer?
No, the people that I work with, I trust. I've never really seen an instance of someone just using excessive force or kind of going beyond. Of course, we all occasionally get emotional, and we may we may get riled up in that way, and I'm definitely guilty of that. But as far as an excessive force, I've never seen that. The people that I work with are extremely professional. And,
That's a blessing.
yeah, I mean, and I'm lucky that way. And,
Yeah, for sure.
And but we all let a cuss word slip, or kind of go in sometimes when we shouldn't. But,
I mean, I'm a truck driver. I know that. I got.
Well, we're human.
Potty mouth.
We're human, and like you said, like we were talking about earlier a little bit. These things compound. Like sometimes you just have a bad day. You may be beefing with your wife, and your kids may be just out of control. You're getting, like we're human beings.
Yes.
And so
we take this stuff, we put this uniform on, and we know throughout the course of a day, a police officer, we wear many different hats. We fight with people, and then the next instance we may be rescuing a cat from a tree. The next instance we may be talking to two neighbors, one of them who's upset because the other neighbor put their trash can on their side of the freaking property.
Yeah.
And we deal with all this crap, and sometimes you get frustrated,
Yeah.
and that frustration comes out in terms of like a verbal lashing, and it's like,
Yeah.
it is what it is.
And I have a couple of questions relating to popular stories in the media and your take on them, controversies or what have you. But I want to try and correlate one perspective of a topic we touched on earlier and what you just described. Religious people and wanting to sort of put a group in a box and sort of shove them under the bed, for lack of a better way to put it. In essence, it's the same thing people try to do with police.
Mm-hmm.
They try to lump out all the cops into one box
Right.
and put it under the same category,
Right.
which is not fair.
No.
In a constructive world with structure that police officers seem to be, residual in and passionately fight for, which I'm grateful for personally. There's not one thing you've said that I disagree with so far. And it's not due to any intimidation. It's just, you're my sister's husband.
Yeah.
I figured there'd be some sort of link in, the way she feels about you and what I could, pick up on. Anyways.
You sure it's not this gun on this table that's pointing at you?
No, no, I have to pee because of that.
Okay, good.
Or maybe I don't anymore. Okay, so going back to the controversial police stuff. Stephon Clark, let's start there.
Sure.
I won't talk about all of them because there's a shit ton of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the use of force, the decision to approach with force, just that whole situation. What is your take on that?
So this is one of those situations where you have an unfortunate circumstance where someone who was unarmed was shot by police, right? And that's kind of what goes into the media. But when I look at that situation from a police officer standpoint, and we like to use the term, well, that's a good shoot, and meaning that that's a lawful use of force, not that it's good we shot him. No, but that's when police officers talk in terms like that, that's what we mean. We mean that this was a lawful use of force. The reason why it was a lawful use of force, and the thing that the media tends to kind of skip over, and they'll go to, well, he was in his grandmother's backyard, and he only had a cell phone. And it's like, okay, those things may be true, but let's back up a second. You have to understand that when we are getting, now I don't know these officers, I wasn't there, so I can only, opine from the things that I've heard in the media, the district attorney's breakdown of the events, which I saw, which was I thought was the district attorney did an outstanding job of kind of breaking down that event to give you insight as to what led to that unfortunate circumstance. And this is kind of going back to a little bit when I said is wait for facts and evidence before, you can grieve and you can be, we can do all that. Yeah. But before we start, getting our pitchfork and torches, let's kind of just wait a second. But anyway, so you have Stephon Clark, who there have been calls that he was breaking like car windows and stuff like that. And then he ended up running from the police. And during this whole time, he broke a sliding glass door to a residence. And there was just a bunch of calls like that going on. And as a police officer actively responding to this, that's the information that you're getting. You're getting someone who's potentially violent, who potentially just now broke into someone's house. And that house is, at that time of night, it's probably occupied. We don't know what this person is capable of doing, what they're willing to do. And then upon being confronted by police, now they're not listening. They're running away. We don't know what they have. We don't know who they are. We don't know any of these things. But we are charged with now kind of apprehending this individual to figure out what the hell is going on. What are you doing? Who are you? Why are you doing this? And that's kind of our that's what we're charged with. That's what the people want. People want us to figure out why this person broke their freaking car window, and if they stole something from that car, to retrieve that person's property. That is what society wants from us.
Yes.
Right. So
yes.
So we now have to catch this person to figure out all of these things to kind of get justice, if you will. Mm-hmm. So they start chasing him. He was running, and then he kind of turns the corner at some house that just so happens to be his grandmother's house. They didn't know that. He then runs kind of towards the rear part of this carport, turns around, and as the officers are going to where he made that turn around to run to the back of the yard, they see him coming back towards them as they're finally getting to that corner to peek around. And what they see is, him taking a bladed stance. And what we mean by a bladed stance is, his feet are kind of set apart. They're set. And they see him come to a point with an object in their hand. Now, what people also have to understand, too, is your adrenaline is through the roof.
Yeah.
And one of the parts of adrenaline in understanding your, parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system, flight or fight, and all of these types of things, which happens to your body to protect you in an instance of potential mortal danger. Your body does kind of takes over and does a lot of things. You still have to think through this stuff, but there's a lot of biological responses that happen to you in those moments. Like tunnel vision is one of them. And in tunnel vision, your auditory suppression, you can't hear, and you can't even see. This is why it's called tunnel vision, because you can't necessarily perceive things that are going on in the world that you would be able to if your adrenaline and if all of these biological, things aren't happening.
This is why people don't remember the brunt of trauma a lot of times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's a defense mechanism that your body does to protect you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a lot of times why you go into shock too, because if you understood what was really happening to you, then, that could be catastrophic for you.
Right.
So anyway, so then he comes back, he points, he kind of takes a bladed stance, is what we would call in the industry, and kind of comes to a point with both hands around an object, which kind of looks like someone who's standing in a firing position would look like. So that's what they see. That's what they perceive. And then I believe one of them sees like the flash of the phone and interprets that to be a flash of a muzzle. And so now you have this all going on. Now, and you're talking about, this is happening in seconds, if not milliseconds. This is all happening like instantaneous, and your brain is processing this stuff. And, the end result of that is Stephon Clark gets shot. Mm-hmm. So, again, very tragic. He didn't end up having a weapon. However, you have to take into account all of the things that led up to this encounter, and you cannot dismiss it, because it's important to put yourself in the mindset of these officers who were charged with finding this person who was doing all of this other stuff and getting that person into custody. That's their job. That's our job. That's what we do. Unfortunately, in this particular circumstance, Stephon he did certain things that triggered the response from the police officers, and they were put into a position where they believed their life was in danger based on the things that Stephon did. And unfortunately, it ended in him being shot. And it's unfortunate, but that's kind of what happens sometimes. And it's terrible. And I feel for the family, and I don't, obviously I don't wish any ill upon Stephon, but when you are doing things like this, the other side of that is, unfortunately, this is kind of the consequence of those actions sometimes.
It's the reaction of society.
And that's just what happens.
Yeah.
And so, obviously the controversy that followed is kind of unfortunate, because now everybody's tensions, especially in Sacramento, as far as race relations with the police, are just so high. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that that's not justified. I don't know. But again, we have to look at each individual circumstance to assess what happened here. And especially in the Stephon Clark shooting, you had one of the officers that was black. And so, as a black officer, and then you'll hear things, oh, well, they're brainwashed and they're this and they're sellouts and
It
they're,
never stops.
They're house inwards and they're coons, and it's just like, wait a minute, at what point do the actions of Stephon become the focus as to what happened?
Yeah.
Like, we're focusing on the officers, that's fine.
Sure.
We should.
Yes.
But we also have to focus on the actions of Stephon to assess why this happened.
Right. This was like you had said before, this is a community event. Mm-hmm. This isn't just the cops versus Stephon. This is an opportunity for everybody to learn something. Mm-hmm. And in order for us to be open to education, then we need to open ourselves up to the analytical process of this. And the way you described it, if this was a room full of clones of me, we would have given you a standing ovation, because I have the ability to see these situations like that. And I'm hopeful that there are other people, which I'm sure there are, that can break things down and look at it like that. And it's weird because, yes, there's an outrage culture, but I get outraged watching the outrage culture get outraged. It's ridiculous. So I've had to kind of check myself and rear back from that what do you call it, gallery of sorts, because everybody wants to have their take on it.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, it can be, and but especially because even us as police officers, our job is to protect your rights, regardless if we agree with you or not. So when Black Lives Matter or some of these other groups start protesting and they hate us and they want to protest and they want to do that, that's their absolute right. But who is protecting that or their ability to have that speech? It's the police.
Yeah.
So I don't think people truly understand the amount of, you have to swallow your own pride.
Yeah.
To stand there and allow people who vehemently hate you and are actively calling for you to be murdered and just hate everything about you simply because you wear a uniform, to stand there and allow them to speak their mind and give their opinion and give their perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I don't, is there any other group in life, in American life specifically, that has to endure that?
No, I don't know of. I mean, even the fire department gets off a little bit easier because they're,
people love them. I mean,
they're putting out real fires, and
yeah.
you're standing there hoping that things don't turn into a fire.
Well, yeah. People, the fire department shows up, everybody cheers and claps, and it's right. They're happy to see them.
Yeah,
and, they get the wave the flag on their big freaking ladder, and it's,
Yeah. So, okay. Well, you know what? Dude, I have so many other things to talk to you about, and not just in law enforcement. But I think for the sake of this recording, we'll just go ahead and end it there. Okay. We'll do the questions that I have for you, and we'll make that a separate thing. But I just officially on tape want to say congratulations on marrying my sister. I think you made a good choice.
Yeah, me too.
And likewise for her, I think she made a great choice. I'm so thankful for who you are, and it's so nice to be at home, not worried at all about her. And
I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So officially, congratulations.
No, thank you. She's an amazing. I wouldn't be, if it wasn't for her being here with the kids and stuff. I don't know if I'd be able to go out every single night and kind of do what I do.
Sure,
so
of course.
She's equal parts, as courageous as I am. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, anything for you guys, whatever I can do. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Well, everyone I ever meet goes here in this book. And now I met you, and you're going in the book.
I'm just a wandering nomad out on the interstate. Eventually all these roads just end up looking the same. I'm just a wandering nomad out on the interstate. Eventually all these roads just end up looking the same.
Check mic 1 2 1 2. Mic check 1 2 1 2. Check mic 1 2 1 2. Mic check. 1 2 1 2. Mike Haley in the mix. Biatch.